Hey Powrsuitors, we've just released the dates for our 2024 Power Sessions in Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, Melbourne and Sydney. We'd love to meet you in person for our month-long transformative leadership program specifically designed for women. Save your spot at powrsuit.com. And I burst into tears, and I look back at that as one of the most horrific professional moments.
She does it with me all the time. She doesn't get her own way.
I do, behind closed doors.
We came in here with her in
tears. But this was in front of a VP. It was awful.
No,
and I'm
but we've all been there. And I
mortified.
think that's the thing.
Kristen lacked control. Welcome to PowrUp, a podcast full of insights for women that lead. Hosted by Nat and Kristen from Powrsuit, we're on a mission to amplify your impact as a leader. Join us each week and we'll share with you what's shaping our future, from AI to Gen Z. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes.
Welcome everyone to our first ever episode of PowrUp, our new podcast. I'm here with Kristen, and one of the things that we wanted to get off our chest right at the top is the things we really hate talking about. So we thought we'd just dive right in the deep end and start with something that 60% of us, I hear, don't actually do, and I presume that means we don't actually talk about, which is negotiating. Kristen, do you negotiate?
No, I am a terrible negotiator. Although I'm learning and practicing negotiation, but I have to say I wish I'd had this conversation in my 20s. I feel like I lost out in a really big way through my career and, my financial future. I've lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, research, Nat, shows that in your 20s and getting that first job or whatever, that when you switch jobs, that first salary that you get dictates, because it's on a bit of a step, you get on a step, and that first one can dictate the difference between $500,000 and $1 million at the end of your career, which is crazy.
That is crazy. And I think on a smaller scale, it starts every time you land a new job, right? That the level you negotiate at the start, the level you start on, dictates the foundation, the first step you start on to climb. And I think a lot of women tend to fall for the philosophy of, I'll just prove myself, and once I've proved myself they'll give me a pay rise. But you've already started on the back foot, so you've already sacrificed there. So I think it's a really important topic. Funnily enough, I feel like I'm quite a good negotiator, usually out of necessity, because I always had to negotiate. Most people negotiate one job and then you wait till their next pay cycle, but because I've always been a freelancer and a contractor, I'm negotiating multiple times a year. So I think you just get used to that being a normal part of the process. But what I found recently, and I suppose we're both in the same position, is there's another type of negotiating that I'm very bad at, which is when people don't even talk about money at all and you have to raise it. So when we're asked to speak at things or all these things that you end up accidentally going, wait, did I just give away my time for free and my energy for free? And starting to figure out how to raise those conversations and be like, actually it's very awkward.
I agree. And do you know what? The one great thing we should point out is that it's not always, we should think about it as a package. And to your point of the speaking thing, let's say, for example, the organization that wants us to come and have a chat doesn't have a budget for speaking, but they might have a travel budget, or they might be able to promote Powrsuit. And so I think just like when you're approaching in your career a salary negotiation, look at the entire package, because if they're capped at a certain monetary amount, there could be other things like holiday or flexible work. There's all sorts of things that you can think about. What's the whole picture of what I need here, where I feel valued and there's a really fair exchange of services? So we should think about that as we go along too.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that came through really loud and clear when I was speaking to an incredible man, Steve York, about negotiating. And surprisingly, he's a hostage negotiator, that he wasn't super fixated on winning. His thing was actually having a really clear idea of what you want out of something when you're negotiating and making sure you get that. And money is one tool, but there's flexibility, there's extra holidays, but going in mindfully with prep on what you want out of it. You're not sitting there like a sitting duck kind of going, I don't know, whatever they'll give me, I'll take. You're actually taking control, which is something we're both a big fan of.
Yeah, and I know that at the end of the day, both parties on either side of the table, the workplace and yourself, have to come out happy, because if you're feeling undervalued, that is a really bad situation for any employer, because you're not going to give your best work. You're not going to feel engaged. You're going to get jaded. You're going to be looking for work elsewhere. I think, there's not this like zero sum game. If someone wins, someone loses. But what is this kind of win-win where we can both feel, I'm providing you with the services, I'm feeling valued.
And that sort of feels like the ultimate in negotiation. I looked up the definition, and I can't remember it exactly, but I really like the idea of it's the art of building relationships and getting someone else to want to give you what you want. And I feel like there's something in that. But what I sense, and this is just based on chatting to a whole bunch of people I know, is we get way too emotional about negotiating.
Oh my goodness. And women do. Which, absolutely.
And
why?
We're up against
why
someone,
do you think?
Well, I think because we take our whole selves into it, right? Like this is a real measurable indication of how much value we add to the world.
Yeah.
But it's actually not, because we've been on the other side of it as well, where you're negotiating pay with people who you're employing. And yes, there's an element of emotion from that side, because if you have really been brought into someone and you think this is the perfect person, they're the perfect fit, you've bought in emotionally. But actually, from the businesses or the organization's perspective, it's actually not. It's more practicalities. It's like, we've got this budget, we've got this expectation for the role. They're not there. So you're going emotion versus total pragmatism, which is the wrong way to go about it.
I know. But women do we tie all this emotion up to it, and it's our sense of worth, isn't it? And I think as society, that's what we've done, is just like, what do you do? And how much, and we place kind of this hierarchy of people based on pay. But I know that a lot of employers have these salary bands, and you can, there is negotiation. And, from studies have shown that across a number of multinationals that implement these bands, which are probably more, I don't know, you could argue maybe a little bit more fair, because you kind of know where you're at and you're not going to have these massive swings. But studies have shown that women don't ask, and so they just leave jobs. And so instead of kind of asking within that band and getting to the top, which is within the budget, the men are asking for it, they're getting it, and the women aren't. I suspect that holds true for bans or no bans, but it's just so interesting. The money is on the table and they're not asking for it.
Yeah, and in that situation it really is. And I had an example recently with someone who was going up for a promotion alongside two other people. So there'd be three people sitting at the same level. And she'd already talked herself into all the reasons why she didn't deserve to be at the same level of the band as they were. And I was like, why not? Can you actually list out all the things that they're doing that you're not doing? And they were very small things. And I had to explain, them getting what they want that's not impacted at all by you also getting what you want. Like, you're not taking money off there, and you're not disrespecting them.
There.
And
it's there in the band.
It's there. And there is no, and I think that's the other side of the emotion, is the respect for the people we're around, and we're comparing people. And I've always remembered, because you see in your career a bunch of really good negotiators. I think we've both seen a bunch of really good negotiators, and there is, yes, a correlation between the value you add and your job, but there's also a bigger correlation often between how good a negotiator you are and how much money you get, which is ridiculous when you think you are working potentially 2 years at a job and the amount you get paid hinges on this one conversation.
And I bet your friend actually had, and I'm just guessing, did they look at the hard skills of this role? Did they look at years of experience? Because I would wager that, as women tend to be really great in what we don't like to say is soft skills, but we call them core skills. And these are these interpersonal things. And we form great relationships with colleagues. We encourage people. We take them out for coffee. And there's all this like hidden stuff that we do that forms part of culture in an organization, which is worth something. So it's so interesting that we discount, some of this, all the other superpowers that we can bring and provide value to an organization.
Absolutely. And I think there is a gender element to it. I feel like we haven't been slamming women, but women we do tend to get emotional. We do tend to not negotiate as much as men. But I actually think there is a reason for that. There's probably a million reasons for that. But there is a gender element in how you negotiate. And I don't think either of us has cracked it yet. But that concept of, while a man might appear assertive, a woman can appear aggressive.
Yeah.
And so I think what's happened is, it feels like the models that we see often of negotiating are people that we can't embody. We can't use the same tactic as our fathers or our husbands or the men around us. So I think this is why this is a really important conversation, because we don't have it enough, and we don't have enough showcases of how women successfully negotiate.
Yeah, well, let's talk about and jump into some tips. Nat, why don't you introduce? We've kind of got 3 tips, and that was, really helped by Stu Van Riggs. He's a negotiating coach as well, and we thought we would kind of form this convo by chatting about them. So do you want to introduce them?
Sure. Should I introduce the first one or all 3?
Do all 3, and then let's crack into the first one.
Okay, so we've got the first one, the 3 C's.
Love it.
Confidence. The second one is clarity. And the third one is control.
I love it. And these are characteristics that anyone can use to enter in to a negotiation, and particularly with a pay rise. So as it relates. So shall we start with confidence? What's this all about?
I mean, to start, do it. I think have the confidence to actually do it, which is a decision that you have to make.
Love it.
For me, the biggest, what I learned from this hostage negotiator, Steve York, the biggest thing is having a plan B. And that is what gives you that confidence. By being able to say, if I walk away from this, I have another plan that I am happy with. Not just another plan like I will go back to my job being miserable. You actually go, no, I am comfortable walking away from this if I don't get what I want, because I have an equally good other option, or one that I'm happy with. And there's something about that changes it from I'm desperate to have this thing, all my hopes are pinned on it, so I'm happy to compromise a lot, to I'm actually in control of this. And if I don't, I know where I'm willing to compromise. I know where I'm not. And I have the confidence to go in and negotiate.
That might be the key also to separating kind of this personal and professional, like to be able to say, yeah, I like that. That puts you, well, it puts you in a really strong position, isn't it? When you've got it. And that could be even a plan, like a 6-month plan of like getting a plan out of that conversation to here are the 2 things you hit until we can, and then we can discuss this again, and getting some real clarity around that. So I like the plan B, which isn't always like necessarily leaving, but it could be that I feel in control of my career, and here's all sorts of options on the table, including developing, and how are they going to support that? That could be part of the negotiation. Yes. I might have fallen short in something. How are you going to invest in me so that I can bring my best self to work, I think.
And I think we had a really great conversation with someone the other day about something slightly different, but I think it really relates here about if you were an employer and someone comes to you and says, I really want this job, and you say, nope, you don't have X, Y, and Z skills, and they go away and learn those skills and come back in a year and say, come on, I've done this now, and you turn them away again. The third time, you're not going to turn them away, and I think you can apply that here. And if you are negotiating pay, and you get right to the end, you've got your plan B, they're not going to budge, you're happy to accept it, get very clear feedback on what the things are that are stopping you getting up to that next level, and work on them, make a note of them, work on them, and next time and when you've achieved them, I mean, don't even wait till the next pay cycle, that's the time to go back and say, you know how you didn't want to pay me because of this, I've got it now.
Yeah, that's
So it's really being clear on what are your gaps and getting them to specify them and then working on them.
Yeah, and the confidence thing comes when you know your value. And I think that's something I have always struggled with that. I've had to ask other people, like, what do you think I bring to the table? And part of it is I can look back and be like, what do I really love in my work, in my past roles? And how did I sell myself when I got the job, for example? But also I find I do have to ask other people, like, what are my strengths? And I think knowing your superpowers, as we call them, or knowing what you can bring to the table and your value to the organization is part of that confidence, isn't it? Because you walk in saying, I know exactly how I can move the needle for this organization.
Great, Kristen. What are the things you bring to an organization?
Well, I did this little test because I was like, I don't know, because I think we were talking about, we went and spent a weekend at your holiday home, and we were chatting about our personal brands or something like that.
Yeah.
So then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm really struggling with who I am. So I went and did a test online, and one of them was storytelling. So, and that is a superpower of mine, and that brings people along the journey. That can be in a PR sense, or it can be, making staff feel really engaged and bringing people along a big vision, North Star vision. So storytelling was one of them. Leading was another, leading with clarity. And then one. I've already forgotten the last one, but I was like, yeah, I am good at those things. Oh, and executing. That kind of came out in that online test. So there you
I
go.
love it. And of course, you'd be planning to tie them to a job if you're
Yes,
going for a job.
that's the value piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you think?
But it's,
Yeah.
well, I just think it's really nice to have those in your back pocket. Like, I think that concept in startup world of an elevator pitch of what's your 60 seconds of your business that explains explains what value you bring.
Yes.
I think everyone should have one for themselves. And I'm saying that knowing you're about to ask me and I can't remember mine. It's been a while. But knowing that in any situation, because no one really enjoys, even in a social situation, being like, what do you do? It's quite nice to have a bit of a zappy. So having that, and then having in your back pocket the 3 to 5 biggest, uniquest things you bring.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you tailor them to you. When you go in for a negotiation, you should understand what the organization values and what they need out of it and what problems specifically they're trying to solve with you. It's a lot of prep, actually. And I think that's something. I'm just about to give a talk at UXNZ, and one of the things people say is people don't prep enough for the talks that they give. And I think it's probably the same with negotiating. Yes, it's like a 5-minute conversation often, but it might be 5 hours of prep beforehand. Like, actually set aside a day and get really clear.
That's that strategic piece that we've talked about, right? Like when someone comes into an interview and you ask them, why us, but also why you, or why a raise now. It's that like, oh, well, I've been here for I've done this role now for a year. As opposed to like, I know this organization needs to go from this to this. Yeah. And let me tell you about how I can help. And we've always used that move the needle term, which I dropped earlier. But that really is what we're trying to do, isn't it?
I love that example because that is so let's list off some of the most common things we hear. Yes, it is. I've been doing this for a while. The other one that is my pet peeve is, oh, well, I've just bought a house, or I wanted this, or I've got this expense in my life and I need a pay rise.
Ouch.
And you're sitting there on the other side of the table going, again, why is this my problem?
I know, and it's just mixed signals, isn't it? So if you can leave all that stuff out, because those are realities, aren't they? They're realities of life, but I think it's how can I supercharge what this organization's doing? Specifically, how can I do that? And that you come in with confidence with that, in addition to the plan B, which I think is great.
Yeah, I love that. And I remember years ago, I spoke to a founder of a company who said he was never afraid of any questions, which is part of confidence, especially when you're fronting the media or if you're in a job interview. And I asked why, and he said because he always knows he's the most prepared in the room and he knows the topic more than anyone else. So there's nothing anyone can ask him that he's not ready to answer. And I think if you think about a job interview like that and a negotiation like that, you know the value they need, and not necessarily just what you've read on the website or what they've told you. You're picking up on all these cues as well as you're going through the interview process. And you've also pulled out of your back pocket the value you bring. And I just love that as a line. This is what you guys need. This is the problems you're trying to solve. And let me tell you how I'm going to solve them. I feel like that's a really nice line for everyone to just write down and have the next time you go into negotiation.
Love it. Let's do it. That's wonderful. What about clarity? That this was kind of this concept of baggage. What's that like? What, in your words, how would you explain it?
So I've written down self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think that's what comes to mind when I think about clarity is everyone probably knows a few pessimists around them who go through the world thinking kind of everyone's against them or things never work out. And what tends to happen is they approach those situations in a way that makes it not turn out. They'll approach a group and assume that the group doesn't like them, so they sort of behave slightly defensively. And of course, that's not very likable, so no one likes them, and therefore they have proven that everyone's an arsehole. Yeah. And I think it's probably the same in this. When you go into a job interview, I call it professional baggage now. We've got so much baggage on the situations we've been in. I've just been listening to Malcolm Gladwell's audiobook, Talking to Strangers, and the concept of the more information we have, often the less useful we are.
Yes.
And this idea of like all these little bits of information we've pulled together over our years probably makes us less good at being able to judge a situation. So we go in, we've got all these ideas and preconceived notions about what we're walking into, and we're not going in open-minded and optimistic and ready to see what happens. We're going in with a very clear plan that is never going to work out because there's so many unknown factors involved.
And it's such an emotional, money is so emotional because you probably genuinely feel you deserve it, which is why you're there in the first place, but it's so tied up in emotion. So this concept of clarity is like, just everything, leave it at the door except for your confidence and all of your prep. And you walk in, and at that point, it's this real sense of open dialogue. And whatever relationship you have with your manager, that whatever that looks like, you've just got to go in there fresh, clean slate.
And I like the prep for this because it removes the emotion from it. And I remember my mum telling me a story years ago. She was working at a power board way back in the day, and she remembers the day, I think it was equal pay for women came in or something. And so she went from earning half as much as the person sitting beside her to the same amount. But he was a family man. He had children and she didn't. And she felt so bad about earning the same amount as this person. She didn't think she deserved it, again, because of his situation. Not his skills, not his experience, his situation. And your point before that often you go in thinking you deserve it, I actually wonder if that's even true, because I think a lot of people don't do that prep to recognize they do deserve it.
Well, and your job in the meeting as part of clarity is to get yourself into the other person's shoes and have that really open dialogue of that's that ability to see into their world. If you've come in with your windscreen with all of these feelings and emotions and, I'm feeling it's not fair because the person next to me is making 20,000 more, you can't see into their world. So then how do you have this back and forth exchange?
And it's funny you say windscreen, because it just reminded me of the car driving test analogy of the best way to pass the driver's test is to go in thinking, I'm going to give this tester the absolute smoothest, best car ride of their lives. And I think that really equates to negotiation as well. And I don't want to keep flipping back to confidence, but one of the things is when you don't have confidence, you kind of become a bit selfish. You spend the whole time coming at it from a me point of view of how am I going to prove myself? How am I going to do this? I'm not worthy. I don't have this. Whereas if you come in with that clarity, and your clarity is, how am I going to show this person across from me the best understanding of what they need and how I'm going to solve it.
That's that. You go from self-absorbed, me. How am I going to pay my this? And
what do they think of me? How am I coming across?
Yes, nailed it. Love it.
So I think, and my little tip on that, which is something we added to our newsletter a few weeks ago, is the self-talk thing. Before you go in, I think the best tip for clarity before a negotiation, and it sounds probably a bit weird, but I have tried it. Stand in front of the mirror and talk to yourself in the third person, not in the first person. Yes, because think about how you talk. Imagine yourself as your best friend going in. What would you say to them? You've got this. You've nailed it. They're going to love you. When you talk to yourself, you're usually like, I'm a bit terrible. I'm a bit nervous. I've just spewed 3 times. I'm so freaked out. I don't need to know any of that. Talk to yourself like your best coach. You'll walk in with that clarity and that confidence.
Love it. Okay, control, our third C. What? What's this all about?
What? So, I mean, in this for me, and I will go throw back to you because I think you might have a few more points on it, but control is actually that act of taking control. What are the elements that you can control in the room? There's a lot you can't. You can't control if they've just had a fight with their partner or if they're crammed you in with 1,000 other interviews. You can't control that, but there are things you can control. So firstly, I think we've already talked about it, but do it on day one. You can control the way you're perceived on the way you walk into an organization. And even if you are now in an organization and you're looking for a pay rise, control as much as you can up front. Set yourself up on day one to make that happen. The second one I really liked, again from Steve York, hostage negotiator extraordinaire, is don't face the window.
That's a superpower. That's a good don't face the window.
Don't face the window because part of control is picking up on the person opposite's body language.
You're blinded.
And if you can't see them clearly, you're not picking up on those tiny little micro expressions and the way they're leaning back and those little moments. And I think we've all seen it. When you say something and someone subtly leans forward or changes their expression and you go, that's the ticket, that's what they're interested in. You want to be able to control that and get all that information in the room.
Love it. I think self-regulation is probably key here. I think it's a tense and emotional situation. It's supercharged. You've done all the right things. You're feeling confident. You've wiped the slate clean. You've gone in with, you've got these open chats going back and forth. I think the control thing is there's always going to be points where things start to get a bit tense because, all of a sudden you find out they don't believe that, you are of as much value as you thought. And it's rather than going into that spiral, the self-control is about all of a sudden slowing down the room a little bit. You can talk a little bit lower, you can talk slower. And I know Richie McCaw, who's his best, the GOAT of all black New Zealand rugby of all time, he has used this kind of low and slow. And you don't use it all the time or people are going to think you're really weird. But it brings your heartbeat down, it brings the emotion down. And then the question you ask in your head is, what is it that they don't see? It's not a foregone conclusion, but it's great questions as well. What is it that they don't see? And then you can attack that. But it's this kind of self-regulation rather than starting to panic and starting to get emotional. It's, breathing, it's sitting back, it's taking a moment, self-regulating your behavior, which protects you, because the last thing you want to do, which I did in a job one time, I didn't get my way. I pitched this big thing. I was very young and I'm still embarrassed. I burst into tears and had to leave the room. I was negotiating a thing. I'd done this thing and I was wanting my way and I didn't get my way. And I burst into tears, and I look back at that as one of the most horrific professional moments.
She does it with me all the time. She doesn't get her own way.
I do, behind closed doors.
We came in here with her in tears.
But this was in front of a VP. It was awful.
No,
and I'm
but we've all been there. And I
mortified.
Think that's the thing.
Kristen lacked control.
But I feel like that's the thing, going back to clarity, that you have to, that's the baggage you can take into those situations, right? So you have to put it behind you and go, I was young, and have empathy for your younger self, or for yourself yesterday. But I think there's
But had I just gone, okay, what is it they don't know? Because I'm like, this was the best thing ever I was pitching to them. So instead of going, take the breath, sit back in my chair, exhibit confidence, I was went, to Mach 100. It was dire.
I love it. I can't believe anyone ever said no to you. But I think that's quite an interesting one, because that fight, flight, freeze reflex, apparently our brains, or whatever it is, our lizard brains, can't actually tell the difference between physical and emotional threats, because it was sort of a very age-old mechanism. So what tends to happen in these situations that are high stress is our brain clicks into that, which means you've lost control. You've absolutely lost the ability to make logical choices. So I think that's a really, really underutilized tactic. Lean back, take a couple of deep breaths.
Yes.
One of the things a friend of mine told me about if you're having a panic attack is sort of name 3 yellow things in the room. Just switch your brain from whatever it is in front of you. And saying that, don't do what I did once. And I was in the middle of a panel on stage, and I was in a right state, and there was a lot of things happening in my life at the time, and I totally did not listen to the question. I was too busy trying to calm myself down. So I was looking out the window, I was looking around, and then it was like, and Nat, what do you think?
I've done that in a board meeting, by the way. And I was like, well, that's a great question.
Why don't we open it to the room?
Oh, yeah.
That's what you do in those situations.
I said, I think I see many challenges here. And they were like, what challenges?
How would you answer it?
Yeah. What do you think?
But I think we've all been there as well.
Yeah.
And I think actually I've been in interviews on the other side where someone said, I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question? Good. I'm nervous. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, actually, people recognize, there's a couple of things that I've learned recently, because all of us have lost out on jobs, lost out on promotions, and it's gut-wrenching. But one of the best things I've heard is if they don't think you're the right person for the job and you've done everything to represent yourself, then actually short-term pain, long-term gain, because they're not the right place. And I think what I found when I've interviewed people who say, I'm just a bit nervous. I don't want to hire people who are the best interviewers.
Yeah.
I want to hire people who are the best at their jobs. So someone who is able to be vulnerable and to recognize that, I've just tipped over a line. Can I take a minute?
Yes.
Absolutely. You're like, oh, great. I now recognize that what you've done is purely because you're feeling a bit freaked out. I feel like that's a perfectly rational response to a situation like this. So it's okay to take that pause.
Well, and another one, a tip from Stu was go in armed with questions. So if you're starting to feel like things are going awry, or you're kind of losing the plot a little bit, starting with a great question, or if things aren't quite, tension's rising, you could say, tell me about the biggest challenge to the business this year. That might be one of the questions you're armed with. And then shut up. And then just shut up, because that puts the spotlight back on them. They're now back into what is it their world needs, and it gives you a minute. And if you're just shutting up, then it gives you a minute to kind of recoup a little bit and listen. And then you can
or not if you can't.
But it resets a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You're probably down a weird rabbit hole, and it's gotten all messed up. Get back to the value you bring to the table. What is it that they need, and try and
And I think there's two things on that. The questions you should have prepared. Think again, tie it back to the value the organization wants.
Yes.
Not necessarily the value you want. And again, from our experience, if the first question you ask is about your flexible work policy or how much extra time you get off, all the other person is hearing is, I want. Yeah. And they're sitting there going, oh, I thought you'd be interested. I love the organization. I'm amped about the future of what we're working on. You don't seem to care about it at all. So you immediately get offside.
Yeah, I love it.
But the other thing I was thinking in that prep around the questions is Steve York was talking a lot about if you can control, the things you can control is sometimes finding out the type of questions you'll be asked in advance. Some organizations now actually share the questions because, again, they're not trying to hire the best on-the-spot thinker. They're trying to hire the best person for the job. But if they don't share that, like, it's perfectly worth asking during the interview process, hey, what kind of questions do you think you're going to ask? What's this interview contain? As much information as you can get in advance, great. But there are also some fairly standard questions. The old, when's one time you made a mistake? When's one time something went wrong? Have those nailed, but not super polished. Like, you don't want to go in and recite your speech on it. You want to go in real human who you are, but actually have them prepared, because there's nothing worse than turning up and being like, I've never made a mistake, because you sound arrogant, but also you sound unprepared.
Yeah. Okay, good. I love it. Well, that's, I'm loving our 3 C's. Hopefully people are taking a lot out from this. Now we at Powrsuit, we like tiny habits and small actions to make big change. And, you'll find that a lot in our newsletter. If people were to take away a small action today, Nat, for being better at negotiating their pay, which is ultimately the value you bring to your table, what is an action that they can do?
Can I actually flip that back at you just to start? Because I want to finish on that action, but I thought it might be kind of interesting to share what's your next negotiation, because I think one of the things when we go to that final tip is that we actually practice negotiation in every part of our life all the time, from who does the dishes tonight to who's organizing the friend's dinner. And I think it's kind of worth thinking, what is the next negotiation we're going into individually?
Yes.
And then how might we apply that tip when we kind of finish on it?
Okay, well...
I don't know if we want to do the tip first then. I don't know.
Well, I have got teenagers, so your life effectively is a negotiation. I feel like I live with 2 terrorists and I'm the hostage. So my life feels like we're constantly navigating, what time we're picking so-and-so up from a party, or, is there a limit on drinks? And so my life at this point feels like I am honing these negotiating skills. I'm trying to think, there's probably some weekend away with friends or something that's coming up that I'm going to have to, negotiate with my daughter, whatever that looks like. So that's probably how will I go into that. I think armed with all the facts, understanding my boundaries, and then she'll have to be selling to me the value of her going away. I mean, I don't know. This isn't very relevant to career, sorry, but this is that's probably not genuinely my next negotiation.
Yeah, it's funny. I was trying to think, because I am probably on the flip side, that I'm going through a stage at the moment where I'm getting way too much handed to me, and I'm like, oh, that person's going to start negotiating a bit. Like, could you please lift a finger around the house instead of glaring at your laptop the whole time? But I think on the work front, one of the things that I have been thinking about a lot more is what we talked about at the start is there's so many podcasts, so many talks, so many things. How am I going to next approach and maybe practice a different way of asking for what I want out of it. And to your point, it doesn't just have to be pay. The last time I got invited to speak in Auckland, I sucked it up and asked if it was possible to pay for the flights, and it was amazing that they hadn't thought about it at all.
Yeah, right.
And so next time I think I'm going to try going a little bit further and be like, because I know that a lot of influencers now have recognize the value of their time to the point that they have a rate card. So I'm just really interested to
And I know
find
you are
out.
an influencer, Nat, so you
Yeah,
go.
I'm desperate to be an influencer. Hashtag like and follow.
You go. Okay.
Every social event in my life now is like, how do we TikTok this?
No, I look, it's totally fair. I think what we're saying is we genuinely, generally women have gone, oh, I'm just going to chalk this up to learning. It's okay, it's fine, and it's great experience and adds to the CV. But you get into that over and over and over again. If you don't ask, you don't get. So love
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think in those little situations is the best time to practice. We used to talk about this a lot with money, that just becoming a millionaire is not going to make you great with money. So what can you put in place when you don't have so much money that's going to take you through? And I think
Yeah.
it's like, what are the negotiations in your life that don't have a lot on the table? The ones that there's really little downside if you muck it up. Practice in those times. And I think the final tip, if you don't have one coming up, or if you do have a negotiation, a pay rise negotiation, or a new job, a negotiation coming up, role play it with your friends, role play it with a
good one.
trusted person,
Yes.
and actually go through, because that goes back to that control thing of being able
Yeah,
to
confidence.
Yes, and you'll
Yep,
find
love it.
they will point out so many things. I did an exercise once where there was a third person just watching,
Yeah.
and so they weren't even involved, so they could go, oh, when you did this, you actually came across a bit defensive, or, oh, did you see that you like leaned back and it kind of felt like you, and they can just really help you, so you're going in with that extra. But anyway, to the final action, because I agree, we do love an action, and I think the obvious one just coming out of this talk is get those superpowers
Yes.
listed.
Yep.
Actually sit down. And one of the things that blew my mind last year, I did some leadership coaching, and for the first time I actually set aside an hour a week to sort myself out, like not to do chores, not to plan anything, but to actually invest it in my leadership skills.
Right.
And I think this is something that all of us should do. Start with 15 minutes, start with half an hour, block it out in your calendar. And that could be one of the first activities. It might take you a couple of days to sit down and go, okay, what are the things that I think I'm great at? The next step, maybe talking to your friends and going, do you agree? Or asking them, asking your workmates.
Yes.
What would you do to
Well,
get them?
the online thing is what I did. I think I did this weird, I can't remember if it was like a skills thing or it was some vocational thing where you go on and figure out your strengths. I know there's all those different type of like personality tests and stuff, isn't it? So it was really just reading that assessment. I think I did this little thing and kind of, oh yeah, I self-identify with that. I reached out to 2 ex-colleagues who helped, me figure that out. And then I thought about things that I really love doing. Now, just the only caveat here is once you've got your superpowers, make sure that they're moving the needle, like you're using them. And they're important to the business. They're strategic. That's that real difference between like, I'm really good at organizing things to like, is that what this company needs? Is it what they value? Because that, you want to tie those really superpowers to being strategic. So I know I've stretched our action a little bit, but start with the good things.
I like that. And
Yeah.
so if we break it down, because there's another side to that as well. If we go, list them down.
Yeah.
Google personality test, Google how to identify
Talk
my
to your
superpowers.
colleagues.
Second thing, ask colleagues,
Yes.
ex-colleagues, ex-bosses, family, friends. One exercise I did years ago, which I thought was fascinating, is we had a group of 10 people at a course, and everyone at the end of the course had to write a letter to each other, which felt like at the start, I was like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? It was fascinating that the strengths other people saw in each other were actually quite shocking to each of us. So asking other people for not your weaknesses. No one cares about your weaknesses. Start with your strengths and ask them what they see. And you might be really surprised.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is, once you've got that whole list, look at it and go, how do I apply this to organizations?
Or just I would say just make sure that they are in fact the superpowers, because it could be a strength, but the superpower is actually you are using something you are good at to drive that thing forward, that company forward, to move the needle.
Absolutely.
Make
And
sure
then
it does
I would
that.
say the final thing is, do you love doing it? Because
Yes.
this is something that, again, women fall into the trap of a lot, is we're known to be great at organizing. So everyone will be like, but you're so great at it. If you don't love organizing, don't do it. Don't add it to your superpower list.
Love it.
You can have it, again, secondary list. If you need to whip it out in an interview, go wild. But don't have that as your skill that you sell.
Amazing. Onward, Powrsuitors. That's amazing. Special thanks to some of the experts we spoke to, Steve York and StuVanRig.com. Amazing stuff. Thanks to all. That was fun. First one.
That was fun. We got it
Onwards.
done. Send us your thoughts. Write us an email. We love hearing from people. Write us an email. Slide into our DMs. We'd love to hear what you think and any tips you have on negotiating. That'd be amazing.